The silence in the oncology ward was not empty, it was heavy. It pressed against the eardrums, a physical weight composed of unsaid words, sterilized air, and the rhythmic, terrifying beep of the monitor that had become the metronome of Tori's existence. Tori held Mark's hand. It felt fragile, the skin papery and cool, a stark contrast to the strong, calloused hand that had built their porch, fixed the erratic plumbing, and swung their 3 children into the air with effortless joy. Mark was 42. He was supposed to be in the prime of his life, not fading into the sterile white sheets of a hospital bed, ravaged by a pancreatic cancer that had arrived like a thief in the night, silent, quick, and merciless. "Tori," he whispered. His voice was a rasp, stripped of its timbre. "I'm here, Mark. I'm right here," she choked out, leaning close, her tears leaving dark spots on the sheet. "The kids," he breathed. "Promise me. School. Their dreams. Don't let this stop them." "I promise," she vowed, squeezing his hand as if she could transfer her own life force into him. "University. All of them. I promise." He died an hour later, just as the sun began to bleed through the blinds, casting a cruel, beautiful light on a world that had suddenly shattered. The funeral was a blur of black umbrellas and casseroles. People meant well. They said things like, "He's in a better place," and, "God gives his hardest battles to his strongest soldiers." Tori didn't feel like a soldier. She felt like a hollow shell that had to somehow keep standing because 3 pairs of eyes, fearful, confused, and grieving, were looking up at her. Sarah was 12, trying to be brave. James was 10, angry at the world. Leo was 6, clutching Mark's old baseball cap and asking when Daddy was coming home. The week after the funeral, reality set in with the brutality of a winter storm. Mark's life insurance was modest, it covered the funeral and paid off a portion of the mortgage, but the daily reality of raising 3 children on a single income was a mathematical impossibility that Tori had to solve. She had a bachelor's degree in biology, dusty from years of non-use as she had dedicated herself to raising the children. Now, she dusted it off. She took a job as a lab technician at a pharmaceutical plant 3 towns over. It wasn't a career, it was a survival tactic. The next 12 years became a blur of motion. Tori's life was defined by the relentless forward momentum required to keep a family afloat. She became a master of logistics. She woke up at 4:30 a.m. to prep meals, worked a 10-hour shift, and came home to help with algebra homework, soothe teenage heartbreaks, and fix leaking faucets. She learned to hide her grief. She cried in the shower, where the sound of the water masked her sobs. She cried in the car on the commute home, drying her eyes in the rearview mirror before walking through the front door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. But she kept her promise. When Sarah was accepted into law school, Tori took an extra shift on weekends for a year to pay for the deposit. When James got into engineering, Tori refinanced the house she had fought so hard to keep. When Leo, her baby, was accepted into a prestigious fine arts program, Tori emptied her meager savings account to buy him the supplies he needed. One by one, they left the nest. The house, once vibrating with the chaos of 3 growing children, the arguments, the laughter, the thumping of feet, grew quiet. The silence returned. But this time, it wasn't the heavy silence of the hospital. It was the echoing silence of an empty house. Tori was 48 years old. She looked in the mirror and saw lines etched by worry and exhaustion, but she also saw resilience. She had done it. She had carried the mountain. But now, standing in the hallway of a quiet house, she realized she didn't know who she was anymore. She was Mark's widow. She was Mom. But who was Tori? She found the answer in the bottom of a box of Mark's old things. It was a card he had written her years ago, before the sickness. "To my brilliant scientist," it read. "You see the world differently than anyone else." The spark, long dormant, flickered. She remembered the passion she once had for the microscopic world, for the hidden universe of bacteria and cells. She remembered the questions she had about the disease that took Mark, how cells went rogue, how the body turned on itself. She didn't just want to be a technician anymore. She wanted to understand. Applying to the University of Oakhaven for a master's in microbiology was the most terrifying thing she had done since the funeral. She felt like an imposter. She was twice the age of the other students. Technology had changed, research methods had evolved. But her hunger for knowledge was sharper, honed by grief and life experience. The acceptance letter came on a Tuesday. Tori pinned it to the refrigerator, right where the kids' report cards used to go. University life was a shock. The campus was a sea of hoodies and headphones. Tori, in her sensible slacks and blouses, felt like a time traveler. But once she stepped into the lab, the anxiety vanished. The smell of agar, the hum of the centrifuge, the precise slide of the microscope lens, it felt like coming home. She was a diligent student. While the 20-somethings were recovering from parties, Tori was in the library at 7 a.m. Her professors respected her. She had a maturity and a drive that stood out. It was in her second semester that she took Advanced Chemical Kinetics in Biological Systems. It was a required interdisciplinary module, and she was dreading it. Chemistry had never been her strongest suit. She was a biologist, focused on life, not just the reactions that fueled it. The lecture hall was a cavernous amphitheater. Tori took a seat in the second row, notebook open, pen poised. Then, the door opened, and Professor Julian Thorne walked in. He was a striking figure. Tall, with a posture that spoke of confidence without arrogance. His hair was a shock of silver, swept back from a face that was lined with character. He wore a tweed jacket with leather patches at the elbows, a cliché, perhaps, but on him, it looked dignified. He didn't just walk, he strode. He was known as the King of Chemistry on campus, a researcher whose papers were cited globally, a man who understood the fundamental building blocks of the universe. Julian stared for a beat too long. A flush crept up his neck. He cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "Good morning," he said, his voice a rich baritone that seemed to vibrate through the wooden desk Tori was leaning on. "Welcome to Kinetics." For the next hour, Tori was spellbound. He didn't just teach chemistry, he told the story of matter. He spoke of reactions as dances, of electrons as yearning partners. He was brilliant, commanding the room with an easy grace, but there was a kindness in his tone, a patience when he answered questions. After the lecture, the students filed out. Tori hung back, pretending to organize her bag, her heart hammering a rhythm against her ribs. She needed to ask a question about enzymes, at least, that was the excuse. As the room emptied, she walked down the steps to the podium. Julian was wiping the chalkboard. He turned as she approached, and the eraser halted in midair. "Professor Thorne." "Please," he smiled, and the expression transformed his face, taking 10 years off him. Crinkles appeared at the corners of his eyes. "Call me Julian." "And you are?" "Tori. Tori Vance." I had a question about the rate-limiting steps you mentioned." "Tori," he repeated, testing the name. "The microbiology graduate student. I read your preliminary thesis proposal on bacterial adaptability. It was fascinating." Tori blinked, stunned. "You read my proposal?" "I like to know who is in my class," he said, leaning against the desk, giving her his full attention. "Especially those who write with such passion. It's rare to find someone who understands the poetry of science, not just the mechanics." They stood there for 20 minutes, talking about enzymes, then about the campus coffee, and then about the weather. It was mundane, yet electric. Every time he looked at her, Tori felt seen in a way she hadn't felt in over a decade. "I have a confession," Julian said, checking his watch but making no move to leave. "I usually rush out of here to get back to my lab. But I find myself not wanting to leave." Tori smiled, a genuine, flushed smile. "I was supposed to be at the library 10 minutes ago." "Well," Julian stood up straighter, gathering his courage. "Since you're already late, perhaps I could buy you a coffee. To discuss rate-limiting steps." The coffee turned into lunch. Lunch turned into dinner the following week. They discovered that their lives were mirror images of tragedy and resilience. Julian was a widower as well. His wife had passed away from an aneurysm 5 years prior. He had buried himself in his work, becoming the king of chemistry because the laboratory was the only place where the variables could be controlled, where chaos didn't strike without warning. He had no children, and his life had become a quiet, lonely kingdom of books and beakers. "I thought that part of my life was over," Julian admitted one evening. They were sitting in his study, a room lined with mahogany bookshelves and filled with the sound of Coltrane playing softly on vinyl. "I thought I had had my great love, and it was greedy to ask for another." Tori sat across from him, sipping the Earl Grey tea he brewed with scientific precision. I felt the same. I spent so many years being a mother, a provider. I forgot how to be a woman. I forgot how to be a partner. Julian reached across the small table and took her hand. His touch was warm, solid. You are an extraordinary woman, Tori. You carried a world on your shoulders and still found the strength to reach for the stars. It was love at first sight, yes, but it was sustained by a deep, abiding respect. For months after they met, Tori successfully defended her master's thesis. She walked out of the presentation room, exhausted but triumphant, to find Julian waiting in the corridor. He was holding a massive bouquet of wildflowers, not stiff, formal roses, but wild, colorful blooms that looked like they had weathered a storm and survived. Congratulations, Master of Microbiology, he beamed. Thank you, she laughed, burying her face in the flowers. I have another question for you, he said, his voice suddenly nervous. The confident king of chemistry looked like a first-year student. Is it about the Krebs cycle, she teased. No. He dropped to one knee right there in the university hallway, ignoring the passing students who stopped to gawk. He pulled a small, velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a ring, not a diamond, but a sapphire, deep and blue, surrounded by two smaller diamonds. Tori, he said, his hands trembling slightly. Science teaches us that matter is neither created nor destroyed, it only changes form. My love for you is the constant in the equation. You are my second chance. You are my catalyst. Will you marry me? Tori didn't hesitate. She didn't think about the past, or the struggle, or the grief. She thought only of the men before her, who looked at her as if she were the sun. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Julian. 1,000 times, yes. They were married 2 months later, exactly 6 months from the day he had walked into that lecture hall. It was a summer wedding, held in the university's botanical gardens. The air was thick with the scent of jasmine and earth. It was a small ceremony, intimate and profound. She wore a dress of pale, shimmering gold, the color of dawn. She didn't walk alone. Sarah, James, and Leo walked her down the aisle, a phalanx of love and support. When they reached the altar, Julian was waiting. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, his eyes shining with tears. The officiant spoke of seasons, of winter giving way to spring. He spoke of how love, like energy, is resilient. As they exchanged vows, Tori looked out at the small crowd. She saw her children, grown and happy, their faces beaming. She felt a sudden, warm breeze rustle through the trees, and for a fleeting moment, she felt a sense of peace, a silent nod from the universe, perhaps even from Mark, that it was okay. That she had kept her promise. That she had raised them well. And now, it was her turn. I, Julian, take you, Tori. I, Tori, take you, Julian. When they kissed, the applause was raucous. The chemistry professor and the microbiologist. The widow and the widower. Two broken halves that had found a way to make a perfect whole. They lived happily ever after. It wasn't the fairy tale, happily ever after, where nothing ever goes wrong. They still had arguments about whose turn it was to do the dishes. They still had worries. They grew older, their joints stiffer, their hair whiter. But they had each other. Tori went on to publish her research. Julian retired and took up painting with Leo. They traveled the world, visiting the places they had only read about in textbooks. They held hands everywhere they went, a constant tactile reminder of the miracle of their meeting. In the end, Tori realized that chemistry wasn't just about what happened in a beaker. It was about the alchemy of the human spirit, the ability to take grief, heavy and leaden, and through the heat of perseverance and the catalyst of love, transmute it into gold.